Hi guys, I am Vitold and it's truly exciting when you are choosing BMW R1250GS or Ducati Multistrada V4 for yourself, and I'll give you pros and cons of choosing one over the other in this video, because those motorcycles may seem similar, but in fact they do almost everything differently, and I will divide this into 5 parts: engine and performance, handling and balancing, technology and equipment, quality and design, and the last part, comfort and overall feel, which includes some additional thoughts. And actually I could have done it on one hand. So anyway, let's rock. Starting off with performance. This may seem obvious, but it's not, perhaps. First thing we see here is power and the difference in the number that we all see is large between these bikes. It's obvious and it's real. The latest and greatest Ducati Multistrada in its V4 version has 1158cc of engine displacement, 170 horsepower, and is a true beast on paper and in reality. While BMW R1250GS has 1254 cubic centimeters of engine displacement, 136 horsepower, and is, well, just quick. This is 34 horsepower's difference for bikes that weigh basically the same. The GS is 249 kilograms with fuel. The V4S Multistrada, with equipment that makes more sense than the regular V4, is 242 kilograms with fuel as well. So obviously Multistrada is quicker. It wants to do a wheelie very early on when climbing up the RPM range, and it's just more explosive than a GS, accelerating hard when you do that. That's what we all expected. Now, this is not all, because there is another number that we have to take into account, and that is torque. Now, this is when it gets confusing for some of us. Multistrada has 125 Newton meters of torque at almost 9,000 RPM, while the GS has a staggering 143 Newton meters of torque, and it is achieved much lower, because just over 6,000 RPM. What does that mean? This means that the GS will give you the kick that you're looking for much earlier after opening the throttle. So you won't have to rev the bike very high to benefit from its power and make it accelerate like crazy. But on the other hand, in a Ducati you would have to reach higher RPM to benefit from its power. So pretty much whenever you open the throttle, the GS will start accelerating really hard thanks to all that torque. And in the beginning, it may actually leave the Ducati behind if both were at lower RPM and the same gear, let's say. And we usually keep the engines in lower RPM, and only when we plan on racing, we stick to lower gears and higher RPM for longer periods of time. So GS will have that immediate kick like an electric or a turbo diesel car. Now Multistrada will need to first reach high RPM to really start going. Until then, it's just okay, and not that much more. Like a car with a regular petrol engine and without any turbo or supercharger. So putting this into real life situations, if you're about to race somebody and you know you are going to be all into it from the beginning, or if you're on a racetrack, or if you're going to race these two bikes on a quarter mile against each other, Multistrada will do better, because you'll be able to drop a gear or two in the beginning, or start from lower gears and pull it all the way up. And in that high RPM range, you will be able to keep it there and just benefit from all that crazy power. Now, if you are more into having that immediate acceleration, GS will react quicker and it may accelerate better than a Multistrada for some time. Not very long though, as Multistrada has rather short gears, so it doesn't take long for it to actually reach that high RPM. Anyway, if you just want to be able to suddenly overtake some vehicles without having to drop a gear or a few first, then the GS may be a better choice. It is actually much more flexible. So you may keep it in the 6th gear below 4,000 RPM and will be happy with plenty of freedom and pulling power available, while the Multistrada in the 6th gear below 4,000 RPM as well, it will shake and will choke when you open the throttle. So it's not that smooth in terms of power delivery, despite having 4 cylinders and the GS just having 2. So Multistrada has a V4 engine, but it behaves like a traditional V2, engine rather than a super smooth inline 4-cylinder engine, which is a little bit confusing. Yeah, it was a big surprise for me, to be entirely transparent with you. And also in terms of sound, it sounds like a V2, but it's very quiet. It definitely needs a proper aftermarket exhaust. Please do give it a proper exhaust, because it may deserve it. On the other hand, the GS sounds like crap, and almost literally, well, it's personal. I don't really like the way it sounds, while I do appreciate all the advantages of its 2-cylinder boxer engine. What you see sticking to the sides of the bike are its cylinders, and yep, you may hit something with them, but you will likely not, except for kicking them and hurting your legs, which I always, like, maybe not always, but almost always do in the beginning once I sit on a GS. Now, if the bike falls, it rests on those cylinder covers or crash bars if you install them, which I highly recommend, and then it's easier to lift it up. And I personally think it actually looks quite badass because of them being there. As for the gearing, I find the GS fine with rather short gears. Ducati also has shorter gears than I probably would expect it to have, knowing that it's a 4-cylinder engine. And that's why it feels to me like a V2 so much, which usually also has pretty short gears. The Ducati runs out of those gears pretty quickly, because once it starts going and reaches that red line in the first gear, then it's freaking amazing. Then it's freaking amazing with all that power. You've got to be ready to very quickly switch gears, or the bike experiences this this funny kind of sudden cut of power, which is actually quite annoying. It feels so effortless in the higher RPM, and it is so quiet that without looking at the rev counter, it's not that easy to feel when you actually have or should switch the gear up. This has, I think, never happened to me before on any bike. Well, somebody joked previously, or maybe that was even serious, that this V4 is so gentle and easygoing that it makes the bike feel like a big scooter. I don't think that this was supposed to be actually a compliment, but the longer I think about this comment, the more true it appears to me, except for the fact that there are no scooters with this kind of performance. Now, to add a word of criticism for the GS, then it has this slightly wobbly behavior when pulling the clutch and then releasing it when changing a gear around the red line where it starts, and somewhere in that range when it's at high RPM. So, and when you are accelerating as hard as possible, so having your throttle open. So for a split second it feels like I wanted to slap the handlebar. Well, it's gone almost immediately, almost instantly after the clutch is released again. And this is because there is a boxer engine and it sways left and right even if you rev the bike at idle. Some riders like it, some don't. It could have been better as the Multistrada stays straight, and the only issue with it may be that in some basic settings it still tries to do wheelies, which was a surprise to me. I opened the throttle thinking that the wheelie control will act. Maybe it did, but in the first second I just automatically released the throttle. So still, to sum up and to give a verdict here, what I've got to tell you is that I feel a little bit more comfortable with GS's engine, even though I don't like its sound. And I think that if I were after performance in this class, I think I would actually go for a BMW S1000XR and not necessarily for the V4. And I'm not a fan of 4-cylinder inline engines in motorcycles, but this one, the S1000XR, seems to be so much smoother than this V4 in a Multistrada. And it is so much more refined in my opinion as a whole package. It also feels even quicker because of longer gears that let you just keep going and going before a gear change. But putting the XR aside, even though in everyday riding the GS will be enough likely and will be so much better in terms of flexibility, now as long as you keep the Multistrada in a lower gear, so keep it in higher RPM at the same time, it will always smoke the GS. It is much more exciting and it is visibly quicker, so it wins here in terms of performance. The engine is slightly gay, being so quiet and reaching the red line so effortlessly. There's no low RPM performance. The clutch grabs extremely high in my opinion, which needs a lot of time to get used to. And the bike's really barely shaking and choking below 4000 IPM, but there is a way more X factor here when we want it. So Ducati is just more fun in terms of performance, or can be more fun in terms of performance. Both bikes can have a quick shifter too, so changing gears is easy and the transmissions seem equally precise. Now what about something that many of us don't think about so much? Handling and balancing. This is a tricky thing because you only realize how important this is in your total fun and joy delivery after riding a BMW R1200 or R1250GS. I'm just amazed how important part of riding this is to me. Turns out, actually, suddenly, and I am a guy that gets so happy when he sees a high power or torque number. But look, there aren't any direct numbers in terms of experiencing handling, balancing, and neutrality in riding. This turns out to be descriptive. In other words, this needs to be experienced. And anything you ride, you definitely should compare to the big GS. And I am no BMW fanboy, but there is just no comparison here, and GS beats every single thing in this category, and also probably everything out of other categories, or at least most. So how does Ducati Multistrada in the newest version feel, and how does it compare here with the GS? I've got to tell you that it's very neutral, this Multistrada, that seems to be doing a really good job when leaning left or right. It stays on track, it doesn't do anything weird when braking or accelerating in turn as well. But so does GS, while also giving you the feeling of being 100 kilograms lighter, and that it does what you want it to do even before you think that you want to do it. It really is amazing, and you feel it from the first meter riding a GS. So it's generally very, very encouraging to ride, to do a sudden U-turn, to play with it and just change directions, only to experience all this agility of it. And this is not there in a Ducati. And it's also not there in any other motorcycle that I have experienced, let's say except for the RT, which has a similar, let's say, suspension setup and similar geometry. I haven't tried the Harley and I haven't tried KTMs, but I wouldn't expect them to be better here either. So why is that, you ask? It is largely due to three reasons. First is that this boxer engine has its cylinders sticking to the sides of the bike, and that lowers the center of gravity a ton. It lets you control the bike much better because of that, and because it reacts pretty much immediately to what you are doing. And it's not nervous when doing it, don't get it wrong. It's not like you try to take a snot and the bike flips. No, it's not that. Secondly, it's the telelever front suspension that's only there in BMW. And it very successfully prevents the bike from diving when braking, and also when doing pretty much anything else. It's just staying flat. And this also helps to control the bike. The third thing here is, I guess, just BMW's magic. None of their bikes has any handling issues as far as I'm concerned, and they are all quite well balanced. Yeah, and mentioning braking, BMW R1250GS is, I think, the king here, thanks again to the same telelever front suspension, and thanks to staying absolutely under control when braking. And I've mentioned it in my honest review of the GS not long ago. It just makes you want to suddenly squeeze the brakes just to feel the joy of how quickly and easily the bike slows down while giving you pretty much perfect control. And I haven't felt that in any other motorcycle other than the RT, which also has this kind of suspension. It's possible that the Multistrada can stop in the same distance, but the feeling that it gives is so much different because it simply dives. It puts additional pressure on your arms, on your wrists, and the whole shoulder area, and it makes you lean back because of that to counteract much more. And not to mention that controlling a bike that's having its weight shifted forward additionally because of diving is also more difficult, and generally braking should not be that effective because the rear brake can do much more when the bike stays flat, so there's more weight in the back. I gotta say, it's just amazing how the GS behaves, and it gets a top score here in the area of handling and braking, and definitely wins over the Ducati on the road. Off the road, what's worth mentioning is that traditional front suspension may be behaving better in soft conditions, and that's the Ducati in this case. It also, Ducati now has amazing 22 centimeters of ground clearance, while the GS has only 18.5, and that's a big difference. The adventure version of the GS has 22 centimeters, so imagine. So off the road, on paper, Ducati may win thanks to its ground clearance. On the other hand, the GS has longer wheel travel. It's 19 centimeters in the front, while the V4 Multistrada has 17 centimeters in the front, and in the rear the GS's wheel can travel up to 20 centimeters, while the Ducati's just 18. So perhaps in the off-road category it kind of balances it out. But speaking of balancing, the GS is so much better, and control can mean everything when off-roading. The Multistrada V4 won't give you that much of it. It's really good, but it's not that good in my opinion. So we've got 1-to-1 right now, and the next topic is super exciting because it's about technology and equipment, and man, can those bikes have cool stuff. Both manufacturers are true assholes for offering those already pretty expensive bikes without some basic features in their base versions, and that's freaking ridiculous, and shame on you, BMW and Ducati even without regular cruise control in the base V4. And what's more, the V4 compared to V4S, which is kind of an upgrade, is getting, wait for it, the V4 is getting worse brakes and a smaller screen, 5 inches and not 6.5 inches like in a V4S. And just you be the judges, guys. Let's focus on what we can get, because that's super cool, and one bike actually has a bloody edge over the other one here. And aside from cornering ABS, so working in the corners too, from cornering front LED lights that put more light on the road when leaning left and right, or from your side left and right, hill start control, so the bikes can keep a brake engaged on their own in order for the bikes not to roll forward or backward when you are setting off uphill, for example. Aside from traction control and cool menus with plenty of useful information, heated grips for the actually GS, which Ducati can also have, but if you pay. So aside of those things, there can be heated seats for riders and passengers in both of these bikes. Seats are adjustable also in both. And for Ducati it's between 84 and 86 centimeters, and for the BMW it's between 85 and 87 centimeters. So moving further, we've got keyless access that can be added there in both bikes, meaning that you may keep the key somewhere in your pocket, in your backpack, or in your purse, or in your stomach, and the bikes will let you start the engine and switch off just like that with a flick of a switch. And the BMW will also let you open the fuel cap, while Ducati Multistrada V4S that I was riding, it needed a key to open the fuel cap. So BMW is more generous in its base version, which is duly noted, I would say. And to make it even, Ducati has got some backlit switches on the handlebar, which many of us like, and BMW doesn't do that at all. But there are two things that may matter much more and that BMW cannot have at the moment, even if you would offer your kidney to a BMW dealer. And that is front radar that Ducati can have if you provide an additional sum of money. And what it does, it lets you use adaptive cruise control. So you might set a certain distance that actually is not distance, but it's a delay or a time of a delay, and not literally distance therefore. And the second thing is the rear radar in a Ducati Multistrada that enables a thing called blind spot monitoring. If you notice those lights mounted on the Ducati's mirrors, they light up when the bike senses that there's another vehicle next to you and a bit behind, and warns you this way about that being there. And there's nothing like this in the GS, you cannot have it at the moment. It will likely appear in the upcoming generation of the GS, but right now Multistrada wins here. But does it really? Well, I love the Bliss, the blind spot monitoring system. I tested it on the Ducati and it works on this bike. But there's one thing that's not that obvious when talking about technology. It's been there in a GS forever, and it's a drive shaft. Multistrada V4 has a, let's call it a cheap chain drive solution. So you've got to carry a spray with you when you are expecting any kind of rain or when you want to cover a lot of distance at once. And while we may manage that by installing ourselves an aftermarket, some kind of aftermarket device that will provide oil on the chain drop by drop, and we will only have to refill it, like, let's say, once in 5,000 kilometers, and I had such a device once myself, but we still cannot avoid all the mess being back there in the chain area. We cannot avoid checking the chain's tension, and we cannot avoid changing or replacing it once in a while. And I really don't get why Ducati doesn't follow the good lead of BMW, but actually it's their choice. It's an expensive bike, so whatever, their choice. Because of that, I would say that it's perhaps a tie in the technology and equipment category, and in the end of the day, it may be between having a drive shaft and no radars, or having radars but no drive shaft. Guys, please let me know in the comments what you would choose out of these two, just without focusing whether it's a GS or a Multistrada. Just would you choose the radars or would you choose the drive shaft? And now I will cover quality and design, and it's going to be pretty short. And most of us will say that Ducati Multistrada V4 is a more pretty bike, and that's what I would say myself. Now, in terms of character, I would say it's like comparing a Mercedes GLE to a Mercedes G-Class. GLE is perhaps more pretty, but the G-Wagon has this cool look. It's not pretty, but it looks cool. And it's the same with those two bikes, I believe. Multistrada is pretty, while the GS looks really cool. As for build quality, materials, and overall sturdiness kind of appearance, BMW looks much better up close. The materials seem to be of better quality, everything seems a bit more solid and a bit more well lined. And there is also less plastic in the GS, and I believe that it makes a better impression up close in this area. Just take a look at those, that's my favorite example, ignition switches in 2021 models. Some have mentioned that there is a new one in the newer V4, but I couldn't find any photos on a Ducati official website, and this may or may not be important for all of us, but the Ducati reminds me kind of older Japanese bikes here. In terms of quality, I would say BMW clearly wins. It's not dramatic in Ducati, but it's just, I think it's not there. So let's move to the last part of the comparison, which is comfort and overall feel. Now here it may be close because both bikes provide equally good, I would say, upright position, low foot pegs, so no complaints here. Sitting on both is really nice. Seats aren't too hard. They could be perhaps softer a little bit as for my skinny butt, but I will leave. Ducati has a larger fuel tank by actually 10% because it's got 22 liters while the GS has 20 liters. The question, however, is how this matters, is I wasn't able to test them in perfectly identical conditions, so I don't know how fuel efficient they both are. And something tells me that the BMW may be more fuel efficient, but I'm not going to just trust my assumption here. Feel free to share your fuel consumption results on both bikes in the comments. We will have some insight into that. And remember that there's also BMW R1250GS Adventure with a 30-liter fuel tank here. So if that's what you're looking for, I guess that's the only option here. And both bikes have adjustable windscreens, which really successfully eliminate any turbulences, but they aren't very effective in protecting any rider who is above 12 years old from kind of wind hitting their helmet otherwise. So it's pretty loud out there at speed, and you should still get yourself a taller touring windshield. Now, there is no one better than the other here in terms of protection, but I like Ducati's adjustment system actually much more because it's much quicker and it's easier to use. You just grab and move the windshield in a direction that you want it to, instead of twisting a knob for 10 minutes and never actually knowing which way to turn it. On the other hand, the Ducati gets bloody hot on its left side on the engine, to the point that on a medium warm day, it quickly gets uncomfortable for me when riding in the city as my left leg gets on fire. And this is a disadvantage that may really annoy you every single day if you are going to ride in the city. So I would suggest that you check it out, actually, that you test the bike and pay attention to this. Actually, don't pay attention to this, but if it grabs your attention, if it catches your attention, it means it will annoy you. Also, I feel that the GS is a little bit more comfortable in terms of suspension. It's just a little bit softer, it seems to transfer less hits to your spine, and that's partially thanks to longer wheels travel, and the general riding comfort in the end is a bit better in my opinion here. It doesn't mean that the Multistrada is uncomfortable, but it seems to be a little bit more focused on sportiness. It's definitely not fully focused there, but comparing the two, it's a little bit more sporty, perhaps in terms of how it handles bumps and holes in the tarmac. And if you add maintenance-free driveshaft in the BMW and kind of more peace of mind knowing that Ducatis are not exactly known for their awesome reliability, you should have more comfort with the GS. Now, that's not a rule, that's where the conclusions have led me. Now, if I were to choose between the two, I would be actually really torn between the awesome performance of the Ducati Multistrada V4 and its possibly really great sound with a proper aftermarket exhaust, and between GS's unbelievably enjoyable handling and feeling of better quality. And I've been thinking about it for a long time now, and I decided that I dislike the sound of a Boxer so much and also I cannot deal with the burning leg. I would just really possibly go check out some KTM. Surprise! It's really difficult to choose between those two, so please do let me know what are the selling points for you guys here out of the ones that I mentioned, or maybe you've got something else, and let's see how they stand. So in other words, that's it from me. See you soon, and let's see what you guys come up with. Bye!